all different types of users. Even if you're doing that, you want to make sure that you at least have one or two things that you are exceptional at and nobody else is as good as you, or no one's doing it quite the way you do it. Anyone else with any comments from the exercises?
Yeah, I actually did like that same question that you brought up, but I was having a struggle with the first one with the different types of properties. Trying to figure out your expectation on that. If we were meant to just, list them, give examples.
Yeah, that one was pretty challenging, I think. So what did you end up doing?
Well, I used the information that you gave us as far as the text, and did a combination of the lessons learned and the actual definition in addition to examples.
Okay. Anybody else with any comments on the, well, let me take a note, because I want to revisit what Marjorie just spoke about. I think it's important because I know that that particular question has its sort of challenges. So we need to maybe visit that a little bit. Anybody else with any?
For that one in particular, good morning, everyone. Sorry.
Hi, Blair.
Yes, I don't know if I don't know if I did it correctly, because even I had some challenges this morning. How are you? I'm good. What I did was I kind of described like the type of property, the real property that I would like to manage. And then what I did was I gave like pictorial examples or samples of what I would like to manage. So you would see in the assignment, I started off with something small that I would like to manage, like an Airbnb in the form of a triplex or duplex. And then I added that as I grow in the field, I would like to move on to something that's much bigger and that challenges me in terms of growth. So that's what I did. I'm not sure if that would have been correct.
Okay, sounds good. Anybody else? Odessa, what about you? Any comments on the exercises?
For me, I found them all three very interesting, and it was good in that we were able to dig into those specific topics. So the assignments were pretty good. The one where we had to do the imagine our dream portfolio. What I did was I selected some places that I know over here, which I would love to have under my portfolio. I didn't venture into any of the marine or the airports and stuff, because that for me, I guess it's still somewhat of a dream, but it definitely calls for more experience and more education. So that's what I did. I didn't do it from an aspect of starting off small first, because it's my imagination of what I want to have in a portfolio. So that was pretty good. And then the question that Kevin talked about, the part that Kevin talks about, I thought that was pretty an interesting one as well. But I navigated through them as best I could, just making adjustments and trying to be as objective as possible. I realized that when you try to, like, looking at the offerings of the other real estate companies that are doing the project management and the one project management specific company over here, they are very detailed in terms of just about everything that is covered in property management. And after I've already submitted that, I thought about offering a risk assessment for properties, which I did not see being mentioned in the research that I did. So that was the only thing for me.
Okay, wonderful. Anyone else? Any of the exercises? Any comments?
Right. But I think what Odessa is saying is that you have a lot of big companies right now, because I think the exercise allows us to identify exactly which companies are in the market. And we see, I think H.G. Christie and a bunch of others, do offer the property management service. But one of the things that, I realize that when you have a big company, sometimes they don't treat the client very personally, or they don't have that personal touch. Right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So one of the things that I strive to excel at is really a personal touch and communicating with the client, and just being a professional friend. I use that as one of my niche skills, to really attract clientele, because like Dessa said, you have people who do offer the service, but most people want a personal touch, as opposed to just having a conglomerate or a big guy, just taking care of business in a corporate fashion.
Yeah, definitely. Back to the what I thought was the challenging question, the one about building your portfolio, and it says your dream portfolio. One of the things that I would think that should be a constraint in building any portfolio is, can I do this? And the question ends with asking you to explain pros and cons. And that's where you have an opportunity. Whatever dream portfolio you build, you should be able to sort of rationalize it, or say, oh, this is my dream portfolio, but it might be difficult to do because I would need a lot of resources. I might need a capital of $1 million to do this, or I might need 20 people on staff. If my dream portfolio, for instance, is one where I'm dealing with people with properties all over the world, and that's what I want to focus on, then I may need some sort of additional resources other than just my own wits. So this question is kind of wide open to whatever. That's why it's phrased the way, right? Open to whatever you want to come up with, but whatever you come up with, you should rationalize it. So if it's just, a couple apartments down the street, that's a dream portfolio, but you'd want to rationalize, why that is the dream portfolio. So that was the interesting thing about this question, that people's answer could be almost anything in this question and be pretty much fine. All right. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I did send you guys back, guys and gals, back I'm not sure if you can see it. I haven't checked. I sent you back the quiz in case people wanted to try it again. I'm gonna figure out a way to make sure that it's available so that you can try it over and over again. What we are going to do is, for chapters, we're going to focus on the contents of chapter 5 today, or lesson 5. But for lesson 5 and lesson 6, you're going to have a quiz that you do on your own as an assignment. So it's going to be timed, but you can do it on your own. One of the things about these quizzes that I'd like you to really do is really be able to be pressured for time, because that's how they are. What you get for your certification exam is something where you pressured for time. So you want to practice that. You're not going to be able to sit down and go on Google and whatever people do. You're going to have to kind of be acquainted with the material enough and answer a bunch of questions in a fairly short period of time. And I want you to practice that. I give you an assurance that there's almost these quizzes that you're going to get. I assure you that those same questions will be on the final. So you want to get a leg up. I'm giving you a leg up, that those whatever questions you get in quizzes, those exact questions will be on the final, and some additional ones, but those exact questions will be on finals. So the intention is for you to have quizzes like every 2-3 lessons. We're pretty much halfway through the lessons. There are a couple that connect to each other, so be doing them in tandem. So we've got not pretty much halfway, we kind of halfway, because we've got 6 to 12 left, and we've be kind of gone through the lessons within the next 4 or so lessons. And then we'd just be able to add meat to that for the rest of the stuff. The other thing I'd like for you to contemplate and get back to me is when I want to be flexible with when we take the final exam. I am traveling from the 5th of September to the 20th. So you have an option to take the final exam in the first week of September, like right after I travel, and have it invigilated by someone at the Institute. Or I can wait until I come back, which gives you a bit of time to study. But I'd like people to weigh in and tell me when in September, whether the beginning or the end of September, they would prefer to take the exam, and we'll just do a poll and get it done that day. Okay, any other questions? I hope you prepared chapter 5, and anyone with any particular thing in chapter 5 that they thought was curious or thought that we probably should have a little bit of focus on? And you guys are too quiet, man. What's going on?
I was looking at the special considerations. That was something that got my attention. I didn't realize that just I guess to bring the matter ahead, I didn't realize that these things could be included in a tenant's agreement, such as the emotional support animal, the allergies and the disability, when the property owner can change the construction of what they offer based on a client. So that's question, probably a silly question, but this is what we offer in the Bahamas?
No, I don't think so, but it's certainly possible because it's offered. These kind of things happen in other jurisdictions, certainly in the US.
Right, of course.
Yeah, because the US is a very litigious society. So what people tend to do is to cover bases, because if you don't mention things and if you don't nail them down, they tend to be the kind of things that when things go wrong, because it's not mentioned anywhere, people jump on that. Next thing you know, you're in court. Mm-hmm. So for instance, if you don't, for instance, address something like whether somebody smokes on the property or not, leave it wide open, and then somebody does, and you have a neighbor of that person, say this is a condo or that sort of residential type property, multi-residential property, and you have a smoker in one resident and somebody else in the other residence starts to complain that the smoking, or they say let's be drastic, say the person comes down with cancer. And then decides they're going to sue the property owner, property manager, because they figure they got the cancer from the person who was smoking next door. Or they come down with some lung ailment and say they got it from the person who's smoking next door, so they're suing you. If you don't have in your contract clearly that you're not responsible for the behavior of neighbors and anything they might do or might not do, then you are open to that suit. In fact, even if you do that in some jurisdictions, they may say, yeah, you have that in the contract and the person signed that, but at the state level, we don't think it's fair for you to make them sign that. So that's always possible. It's like the thing that people do with parking lots where they say they're not responsible for any theft or anything that happens in their parking lot. And then you get some states that says, it's too bad that you have that in your parking lot. We don't care that you did. You are responsible. So you do have those kind of exceptions.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting. I didn't think that we had that here in the Bahamas per se.
Yeah. But the main thing coming out of that, folks, is to really, you have to sometimes think of a lot of things that are not meat and potatoes, things that are on the fringes, when you are getting into a relationship with others, because it is the things that you don't think about that sometimes come back and bite you, literally. You know, for instance, if you don't talk about whether pets are allowed or not, and somebody does bring a pet on, and then suddenly it becomes an issue, you don't have a ground to stand on. You can't then suddenly tell the person, look, I don't want any pets on my property because it was never addressed. I mean, you can do that, but if the person resists you, then you pretty much don't have a leg to stand on. You didn't say that you didn't want any pets allowed. So you probably want to do a checklist and literally things that if you're going to allow pets, you want to say that pets are allowed. And even if you're going to say pets are allowed, then you may want to even put some barriers on that. Are you going to allow, you know, anacondas on the property? If someone has a pet anaconda, is that okay? You know, or pet turtles in a pond, is that okay? So you probably want to really think deeply. That the thing that we're talking about here is thinking. When you're setting up relationships, really thinking and maybe setting up checklists so that it makes you think. Lamar, any comments?
No, nothing at this moment. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So unless somebody else has a comment on the exercises we've done or on the quiz from last week, I know some of you said you're reeling from the results, but I hope that that's a positive, the test was a positive launch pad for everybody. I will send you something that shows the overall results, not with anybody's names or anything, and how the questions were answered, some analytics, so that you can see sort of how things worked. I'll do that today. So let's get started. I really want to, you know, this is a holiday weekend, so we want to see if we can get you guys off to spend your holiday. The first thing in the chapter, if we're gonna go through chapter 5, it is, I think. Yeah, chapter 5 starts off by talking about the obligations of the landlord and tenant. And then it gives an example of a covenant. And want to have a little discussion. I can start with Cleophas. What is the relevance? Sorry for this sort of simplistic question, but it's an important question. What's the relevance of having a covenant between the landlord and the tenant? In the case where there's a landlord and tenant, or the property manager and the tenant, or whomever. Cleophas, I don't know if he's here. See his name.
Morning.
Morning.
You say what's the main reason?
Yeah, why do that?
Because a covenant is binding. It's something almost like what we discussed, I think, a few weeks ago with the trust. Like the covenant is something binding, that almost what you was explaining earlier, that, hey, I could give guidelines on what can happen from what cannot happen on my property between the landlord and the tenant, and it holds each party responsible for what they say they're going to do. So it also holds the owner or the property manager responsible for if they're saying they're going to maintain the yard or maintain the home, or even on the inside, sometimes the property manager takes care of that. Or sometimes people say, okay, the tenant, if I rent you my, let's say, apartment in this state, then when you leave, you have to return it to this state. So you have to do the renovations, or you have to bring it back up to where you met it. So covenant just basically, I guess, is there for everyone to know where they stand in the agreement, and to cover everyone in every aspect of going into this venture together, because you're going into something that it's a union basically. Like you're joining
Okay.
together to get it.
Good. So Brittany, I'm gonna take a diversion and ask you a question. How would you recommend we establish what state a place is in when a tenant gets into it? Because state is leave the place how you met it is a really wide open thing. And it's a cause for all sorts of arguments in this business because somebody stays in the place for X period and then property manager comes and says, this place is not the way it was when you came. And the person says, that's not true, it is. And that could be, and it is very much often the source of contention because one person is saying things are messed up and the other person is saying, no, that's the way it was. How do you establish the state that a place is in when a person starts and what it is in when they're done?
Well, I think something like that should be in the agreement as well. Just to like you say, establish what it looks like. I guess you can take pictures as well. And I think some persons do inspections periodically to, I guess, just to check the state of the place. Because I recall when I was renting before, my landlord, she came in and she did just random inspections. Of course, she gave me notice, but she would do inspections of the place.
Anybody else?
I think one of the main things.
Get started sometimes.
I was saying
When
that you would have.
Okay, hold on. We've got Crystal, Kevin, and Marjorie. So I'm gonna get Crystal first, Kevin next, and then Marjorie.
Hi, pleasant good morning, everyone. I would think that you would have like an inspection sheet that lists off various areas of the unit and their details, because it could detail straight up to windows and the functionality of the windows, and it would detail everything, because we all know that there's a wear and tear, especially when it comes to faucets, and if children are involved in it. It could be a wear and tear with using various faucets within the complex.
Okay, thank you. Would I say Kevin, then Marjorie?
Right. Okay, now I'm first of all, maybe a very good point in regards to the inspection sheet. Make sure I itemize exactly what you're inspecting, but I was looking at a leaving inspection. When a tenant is about to depart, you want to make sure that you and the tenant go through and you identify all the issues, all the cracks, and all the damages, so that it can be rectified. So I think the main thing really is that leaving inspection, to ensure that the building is restored to its former state, to identify all of the damages, and also to rectify those damages. Because if a person comes in the premises, they don't really have a new tenant that doesn't have much power. They accept what's there, as opposed to when a tenant is leaving, you can demand or you can enforce that the property is restored and the damages are restored to their former condition. So it's a leaving inspection that's very important.
Okay, Marjorie?
Yeah, Joel, pretty much to piggyback on what Kevin and
Crystal.
was it Crystal, and what Crystal said. Well, usually you begin with that list before you take ownership or before you take rental of the property. The client would sign that form, go through. They usually have a list of, if it's a fully furnished place, or even if it isn't, whatever isn't in the home or on the property, there's a full list of the items, the condition of the items, and once you depart from the property is the same thing. You see what condition it is and when you received it versus when you left it, and that way you'll know if the tenant is to be charged, and along the way, just as you're in the property, like Crystal said, you have to still do that wear and tear. And like she said, those faucets and other items and bathroom seat covers and all these things go bad, especially after you've been there for an extended period of time. So during the time of being there, it's good that this is where the property manager comes in, and they should have been alerted to these things prior to the departure of the tenant so that they can stay on target, and they'll both have an amicable, separation, as opposed to waiting until the end when things are damaged and not mentioned. So at this point, the tenant will be held accountable for it.
Okay, Cleophas?
Yeah, well, she just basically covered a lot of what I was about to say. In my field, what we do is, like Kevin said, we do a initial inspection. We walk through with the tenants at the beginning, so you see exactly what you're getting, and we let you know that this is how it came. Also, we have a checklist, and then also we do periodic inspections, and then the leave-in inspection is done. Whenever you say you're leaving, the leave-in inspection is done as soon as possible, because these things have to be done before you leave. And it's done by mostly the tenant. Also, there is a clause in between where you have a time period to report damages. So you can't come 6 months later and say, oh yeah, my sink been leaking for 3 months, and then now all the cabinets and stuff are now rotting away because the water is now. So all that now is on the tenant, because you should have said from the leak started, when it was a small issue, we could have just fixed the leak. Now the leak turned into a big issue, and now it's a whole major issue. Now we have to put that on the tenant. So it's a lot of things that go into that. I guess that's what the covenant is for. All these things you have to lay out in the covenant to express to the tenant that, hey, this is what the property manager is looking for, and also the owner, but basically the property manager, because the property manager is there to protect the owner's asset.
Yeah, great. In fact, all the points are really wonderful points. One of the intriguing things I heard was someone mentioning pictures, because that's not commonly done. Because even when you do a checklist, for instance, when you go and rent a car, which is again is an aside, sometimes they have this. They tell you, you walk around and you get a little picture of the car, and you kind of decide where a scratch is and where a scratch is not. And that is supposed to offer you as the renter some sort of protection, that when you bring the car back in, somebody is not suddenly saying that you scratched the car when in fact it was scratched when you took it. Of course, there's always the thing about extent. There could be a scratch and that you identify. When you get back, they say it wasn't that big. It was smaller than that, even if they agreed that it was a scratch. Now, somebody mentioned pictures, and I would like to offer, in this age where we have so much access to capturing images and videos and snapshots of things, that maybe we should be at the place where to kill arguments in case we think that they may occur, is that we not just have persons sign off on a checklist, but we have actual dated pictures of the property, and have the persons sign off on the pictures as well. So this is what it looks like, and your signature is on it. So when we get into the argument about, oh yeah, we signed off to say that the bed was in good condition, but I didn't notice this and I didn't notice that. I just didn't look at it closely. So we get those kind of arguments. Anybody else before we move on here?
Yes,
Odessa, then Marjorie.
Okay.
Sorry, Marjorie. Yeah, I have an experience where we rented units for our employees at the bank. And on several occasions, I had to actually go with the while signing the lease agreement. In some cases, it would have been prior to the employee coming in town, and then in another case, the employees were already in town. But the owners actually had the lease agreements, that covenant was so detailed, so long. I mean, anything you could think of, they had inside there. Like, you're not supposed to hang clothes out on the balcony. Like, they were just very detailed. You go on the beach, you make sure the sign stays outside. And then, of course, it was a fully furnished unit in one case. And the detailed listing of the stuff in the apartment, it was actually almost to a point where I felt like, boy, I don't know if we even want to get into agreement with these people, because their list was so detailed. They listed every fork, every spoon, every dish towel, and you can understand the paintings on the wall and all the other stuff, but all of these things are actually the assets of the owner, and the owner will have to replace them if something is lost or missing. And we had to literally go through item by item and tick off, and that was a very interesting experience. So the photos as well, I mean, it could be a very long process, going through all of that detail, but at the end of the day, it's necessary, because those are stuff owners will have to replace, and owners will have to provide the quality, proof of the quality that it was, and all of that stuff. And I remember when one of our employees left, there was this painting that seemed to have been missing. No, the painting was actually damaged, and the owner produced a receipt, and this is the picture of the painting, and this is how it was when we came in the apartment, when you guys came in the apartment, and this is how it looks now. This is what I paid for it, and I'm going to be deducting this from your security deposit, so yeah.
Okay, Marjorie?
Yeah, exactly to what she said. I had a similar experience where a tenant was, they'd done the check-in with the list, and it was a fully furnished home. So as she said, it had every single thing, from every fork right down to toilet paper for the first time. And when it was time for the tenant to leave, I think there was a glass or something that was missing or broken. And the owner actually brought it to my attention, and I didn't even recognize that it was one glass missing. She said, "Oh, we need to replace that," So that had to come from the tenant. But to Crystal's point about the photos, that's exactly the way I communicate with my client now, because they're abroad. So when I have something that I need to bring to their attention, the way we do it is either I send a video or I send photos. And also here in Nassau, with my current situation, the folks, unfortunately, they're elderly who own the place, so they don't communicate with photos. So I take the photos anyway, and when I see them, I show it to them. But they don't have smartphones or stuff like that. They have they don't even text. So it just shows you that you can have varying degrees of landlords and tenants and how they communicate.
Interesting. Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, we run a very fine line to being detail oriented and being ticky-tacky. So sometimes, you don't want to scare the client by being overly ticky-tacky and saying, "Oh yeah, this break, the glass break, this smudge and whatever have you." It may create the impression that you're trying to swing them or trying to swindle. You know what I mean? So I appreciate the fact that we're being detailed and taking pictures and so on and so on. But then again, you don't want to create the impression that you are so overly ticky-tacky that if the client walks in with a muddy boot, you can charge them for that, for cleaning costs. So I appreciate the fact. Yeah, but yeah.
It's an interesting debate, and as a risk manager, I will tell you that what some people often do is says, look, Kevin just mentioned, I don't want to get so detailed and whatever. So what I am going to do is estimate using analytics or using whatever to estimate that my losses from say my losses of glasses or teacups and other little things that are going to go walking is normally in the vicinity of X dollars per tenant. And so I'm going to tack that into the bill. What is debatable about that though is you don't tell the tenant you've tacked that into the bill because people don't do that. And secondly, what is debatable about that is that some tenants are not going to lose stuff and they're not going to leave you with any losses, but you would have built them for the possibility that they were going to be losses. And some people would argue that that's not fair for you to punish some people for what other people do by padding your bill for that sort of thing. Maybe you do just catch the people who are doing something wrong and let them pay for it. I think was it Odessa who wanted to say something?
Yes, that was me. Along the line.
Odessa, you're not clearly coming in.
What Kevin said about being very about the comment that Kevin made about being nitpicking about about every aspect of stuff in the home, and then your comment coming back about factoring in your cost ahead of time in your cost for the units. One of the landlords that I dealt with, they actually had a threshold of losses that they were willing to accept that was considered acceptable, versus if a spoon is missing, I want to charge you for a spoon, or a glass broke, I'm going to charge you for a glass. They had a threshold that, okay, if there were like 3 glasses broken, then you'd have to replace the glasses. If there was like 5, like they had this threshold where it didn't really nitpick on every little loss, but anything over a particular value, etc., then they held you accountable.
Yeah. And later on, when we delve into risk mitigation and insurance and all that stuff, we're going to revisit some of these things, because as a property manager, you really do have to think about what are the things that are going to cause me to lose, and how do I not lose? And that's talking about risk mitigation. Okay, that's an interesting conversation. Again, property managers need to figure out what suits me. I don't believe there's a cookie cutter solution to anything. A lot of times you have to really just know what the options are. I have an adage, a great human being is one who understands that to be human means that you have the ability to always make choices. That's just what makes you human. However, having the ability to make choices is really not enough. You also have to know what your choices are, because we all have ability to make choices, but a lot of people don't even understand or know what their choices are. So you have to develop the skill, one, to know that you should always be in a position to make a choice. 2, to have the skill to figure out what all of your choices are, the skill and the knowledge and the background to figure out what are all my choices. And then the other skill is to how to make the choice that actually does the best, gives you the best result, not gives so-and-so the best result, or something that someone else would have done well for them, but what choice gives you the best result. And that's really what being a sensible and wonderful human being is all about. And you take that into your business world. There are tons of ways you can do any one thing, but you have to know what those tons of ways are. You have to continue to try to find out, and even yourself, you can create ways. You can say, let me blend these 2 different ways and do half of this and half of that. You can make up new ways of doing things, and then you have to choose what's best for you. Okay, the next thing that I want to touch on, which is very important, is one of the things that you see with the covenants that are mentioned is the language. And And I don't know how many of you love that kind of language, but it is an interesting way that a lot of these legal and covenants are expressed. And there are many people who don't particularly like or just just automatically adapt to the way these things are put in place. So for instance, if I read the thing on the first thing on page 84, and I'll read it so you can hear how it actually sounds. It says, the landlord hereby covenants with the tenant that the tenant paying the rent hereby reserved and performing and observing the several covenants on his part herein contained shall peacefully hold and enjoy the demised premises during the said term without any interruptions by the landlord and any persons rightfully claiming under or in trust for him. That's one sentence. It probably has 100 words. What is that one sentence with all that stuff that I had to catch my breath even? What is that one sentence saying? Somebody? Let me pick on someone who hasn't said anything. Lachey, what is that one sentence saying? You know, Crystal has an answer, but I'm trying to pick on Lachey. I know she's here. Are you here, Lachey?
Yes, can you please repeat the sentence for me?
Oh, okay, let me give it another try. It's on page 84 if you have your book, by the way.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna give it another try because I think what's interesting about reading it is that it's when you read it, you actually then get that real sense of how much gobbledygook this is. The landlord hereby, this is one sentence. The landlord hereby covenants with the tenant that the tenant paying the rent hereby reserved and performing and observing the several covenants on his part herein contained shall peacefully hold and enjoy the demised premises during the said term without any interruption by the landlord or any person rightfully claiming under or in trust for him. What is that saying?
Okay, so for me, it's saying that once everything is already signed up, they're putting their trust in the tenant to uphold their part of the agreement, and the landlord won't interfere unless, I guess, the lease comes to an end and stuff like that, or they decide that they're going to move out.
Okay, good. Marjorie?
Yeah, yes, pretty much what she just said. And also that the tenant also, what is it, covenants to pay the rent as well as to enjoy the property or to stay therein without any interruptions, I guess, such as being evicted or leaving the premises without paying, kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, and Cleophas?
Yeah, it's basically saying once the tenant is paying on time and once the tenant adheres to the 7 covenants that they agree to, then you shouldn't have any interference from landlord or anyone on his behalf.
Okay.
Or her behalf.
So yeah, all of that is saying in this way of speaking, and it's almost like a new language, to be honest with you. All of that is saying pay the rent. You're the tenant, so you must pay the rent. You're committing to pay the rent, right? That's one thing that it's saying. The other thing that it's saying is that you have the right, and I'm going to use the words they have here, to peacefully hold and to enjoy the premises. That's critical. Peacefully hold, I mean, no one should be messing with your peace. No one should be messing with your ability to enjoy the premises, because that is what we're agreeing to here. You got to enjoy the place. Mm-hmm. And it says you can only do that during the time we agree. So the day after you're supposed to leave, you can't expect to be holding it. You got to go. You can't say I've been here for 2 years, give me 1 more day. No, you gotta go. It says during the said term and without any interruption by the landlord, and it says any. So the landlord can't get up one day and say, you know what, Bob, I kind of tired of you being here and I need to do something with my place. I think I need you to leave next week. No, the landlord can't interrupt. The landlord can't knock on your door at 2 o'clock and say, hey, I need to inspect the place to see if you have any, if you have a bunch of people in here doing X. No, the landlord can't interrupt you. And that's what's being agreed to here. And the landlord's property manager can't do that either, or any agent of the landlord can't do that. So that's what all that gobbledygook is saying. What I want to get at, and I think Kevin, let me let you barge in here before I say my last piece. Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the word peacefully hold, because a peacefully hold suggests that
you don't like the word peacefully hold. Okay, explain that to us.
Because it seems if you're putting yourself in the corner, because if the tenant could come to you with any strange thing saying, man, the people invite too much people in their house, too much noise,
dogs barking. Dogs barking in the neighborhood.
So it could create an issue in terms of you as a landlord or the property manager, because the person can hold you accountable for all these things.
Yeah, but I think the lawyers are going to argue that peacefully hold the premises kind of doesn't extend too much beyond the premises. Although this is where you get into legal arguments, because you do have legal arguments about this stuff, where people are arguing that, hey, I'm on my property and someone's flying a drone in my yard every day, coming up to my window, and they're messing with me. Courts have ruled that, hey, no one should undergo that sort of messing with. The neighbor next door is throwing a party every night. But as a matter of fact, if anyone followed the long-standing feud between Nygaard and Louis Bacon, anybody followed that feud? The neighbors.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The heart of that feud was a bunch of this one making noise all the time, this one doing that all the time. It was just a thing about, my neighbor's not allowing me to enjoy my property. Therefore, I want to break their neck in court. And they were throwing millions of dollars at each other every year over this stuff. So this stuff can really happen.
Yes.
Okay, so interesting, that part of the covenant that we just read is really saying something fairly simple, but the way it's said is not that simple. You have to develop an ability as property managers to read this sort of material and pull out the simple thing that it's saying. And you're not going to get that ability unless you read enough of this sort of thing. We tend to avoid things like this because it is dense. I'm going to suggest to you that you put aside some time to read through this sort of language and almost do it as if you're an interpreter and says, okay, how would I say this in a sentence or two? In fact, one of the exercises I'm going to give you in one of the quizzes is you're going to get something in this kind of language and say, what does this mean? And what does this mean in 5 words, in less than 5 words? You're going to get that kind of exercise. So I'm going to suggest to you, you want to find some time to read through stuff like this. There's tons of stuff like this, even on the internet and all over the place, to read through it and do this thing about, okay, I'm reading this stuff. What does this mean in 5 words or in 1 sentence, 1 short sentence? Okay, so when we talk about the obligations of the landlord and the tenant, we're basically talking about several different things. The tenant has a right, they're paying for something, they have a right to get what they pay for. The landlord has a right to be paid for what he is giving. Definitely, let's start at the level of the money exchange. The landlord also is, if you read through most covenants and agreements, the tenant is gonna not agree, for instance, to pay your taxes. You know, I'm not gonna pay your property tax, it's not mine. Then you have to, because you do have a lot of property managers or property owners who pass on the property tax to the tenant. I would tell you, in many cases, most astute tenants would argue that that's not for me to pay. So what property managers or property owners would have to do is somehow tack that into the rent if you can. But it becomes difficult because if rental rates are a certain rate in a particular community, it becomes kind of difficult to tack on things above the rental rate. So it becomes difficult to tack on the property tax and your license fee and all sorts of things that people may want to say, look, I'm gonna have to recover that from the tenant. Anybody with a view as to whether they think someone who owns a piece of property should have the tenant pay the property tax?
Only if the tenant
Cleophas?
has some kind of ship.
Cleophas, okay, Marjorie, you started, then Cleophas.
Well, generally, we would say no. I would say no. But if the client has if the renter has a rent-to-own component, then, you know, that would be part of what they would do as an upcoming owner. But in general, I wouldn't think that that would be something that would be the responsibility of the tenant.
Now, that's an interesting point, and I hope everybody took note of that, because that is a very interesting and valid point. If you're dealing with someone and you are saying to the person, you are renting to own, then that is a situation where it's quite fair to say, you know, you might as well pay the property tax, because you're establishing the path to your ownership, either by wholly or partially paying the property tax. That's a good thing. I wish everybody here can take note of that. I think it was it Cleophas who had something to say?
Yeah, basically, I was going to bring up the same point. But
On me?
I said basically I was going to bring up the same point. I know in some instances in the past, a lot of tenants, at first they started doing it when they had that whole rent to own thing, when people was going into that a lot. But the problem that a lot of people had was the owners were selling out from underneath them. So a lot of tenants now tell you they're not paying the tax until they own it. So you have that type of situation going on, but it's basically just negotiation. I know a lot of people put their fees, like if you live in a gated community, most gated community have association fees and stuff like that. A lot of people tack those in to the rent because I guess you're using the actual facilities of the community, such as the pool, the gym, the guest house, stuff like that. So I know they tack that into the rent, but the actual property tax mostly falls on the owner.
Anybody with any experience with a commercial property and this particular issue of property tax? No, well, I'll give you an experience of mine that I had with a commercial arrangement where as the person occupying the building, you found out suddenly that the property manager / property owner had not been paying the property tax. And suddenly there was some jeopardy related to the government going after the owner / property manager for their property tax. And in some jurisdictions, that can actually mean the loss of the property. Doesn't happen in the Bahamas yet. But there are some places where if you don't pay a property tax, government can come and say, you know, that's my building. And if you're renting the building and so this dispute arises and the government suddenly decides that the building belongs to them, and we talk about a business here, your business operations could be jeopardized. Because you could find yourself being told, like, we're taking over this building, we don't want anybody in here because we want to sell it. We're the government. So that's a consideration that we'd have to work out. Crystal, then Marjorie.
No, I actually wanted to ask a question with diverting from the topic a little bit, because you mentioned
go ahead.
the taxes. However, with the situation with a tenant, the owner was a part, they had a complex, they had a unit within the complex. And like you said, there are HOA fees, and the fees were not paid for an extensive long period of time. And then the unit actually got repossessed by the bank. However, the current tenant, who is paying the rent and everything on time, doing what is needed to be done as the agreement within the lease, now has to be evicted out of the unit and only given 7 days to move. There's no last month rental being thought about, and as well as the security deposit. So how does even that individual stand on that grounds with now the bank saying, I have 7 days to move?
Yeah, that's an interesting conundrum. We're gonna investigate that quickly after Marjorie's comment.
Okay, well, my comment is more of a question, actually. And
Oh,
it's,
another question, okay.
it's a question directly to what you said about the tenant, the property manager being responsible for the taxes. So my question is, does that mean that the property manager was given funds to facilitate these taxes, or was it expected to come out of the pocket of the property manager?
Okay, so that's a great question. There are two sort of blanket answers to that. If you're a property manager, depends on the extent of how you are running your company. You can say to your owner, look, this is the property tax. In particular, a lot of property managers will have arrangements with owners that are never in the Bahamas but own property here. You say, this is the property tax. You need to make sure I have the money to pay it. Or another scenario, you're the property manager, make sure the property tax is paid. So you're determining how that happens. So as a property manager, you can say, okay, now I'm being given agency rights. And so I'm going to collect the rent. I'm going to make sure that the rent collected for this property can cover all expenses, including whatever the property tax is, and I will pay the property tax. Or you can say, I will furnish the property tax because it's due in January, so I'll pay it. I will charge you for paying it, and I will make sure that I recoup my payment. There are many different ways to approach it. It depends on your resources, depends on how you want to do things, depends on how you want to account for things. Because as a property manager, you may have the resourcing and the setup to say, look, I'm going to pay for everything, but I'm going to recoup, I'm going to call those expenses, and I'm going to recoup my expenses and my revenue from my clients who are property owners and tenants. Because remember now, the property owner is a client of yours and the tenants become clients of yours in certain situations. Marjorie. Your hand is still up, or?
Oh, no, that was answered. Let me take my hand down. Thank
Okay,
you.
is that answer good enough?
Yeah, that's actually perfect. I was just trying to figure out if the property manager would be held accountable for that. But if they have those resources and that the owner is going to facilitate it, or it can be collected from the rent, then I would understand the lawsuit that was put against them,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it means they were responsible and they had resources outside of their own finances.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
So it depends on how you want to flavor it as a property manager, whether you want to have the kind of company that, and I think it's like you're at the top of the food chain where you're saying to the clients, look, I take care of everything. You don't have to think about anything. Of course, when you say that and when you're in that position, you are going to make sure that your revenue is taking care of all of your expenses, including the income of yourself as property manager. So while you are paying all expenses and you're fully responsible for the expenses, and the property manager doesn't even know what the taxes, the property owner doesn't even know what the taxes are, you are collecting the relevant revenue from all parties to make sure that you cover the expenses. And that calls for, as we talked about earlier, having your accounting skills and in top-notch form. You can't do this stuff by the seat of your pants. You can't start doing revenue, expenditure, and budgeting and that sort of stuff if your accounting stuff is not up to scratch. Kevin had something to say.
Right. I mean, I think more so you need to have a line item or in your invoicing or your billing to the tenant. You need to have a line item, especially for commercial clients, in regards to business continuity costs. Those costs that you need to continue the business, which is a real property tax. Now, we noticed that in the past, last year, the government increased tax threefold. Now, if you were going on the previous billings, I'm sure the pricing of the tax would have been built inside the rental, and you could pay that. But when you have an astronomical cost that's suddenly imposed on the business, it puts you in a bind because your current rental is not sufficient to cover the property tax being charged. The government changes the property tax legislation, they revise and revalue all the properties, and everything now is like threefold, fourfold. So you need to have a protection either in your agreement or in your pricing to say, listen, I have a liberty to pass on material or significant business costs, continuity costs to you, in order to recoup, or to ensure that the property remains available to you.
Okay, and we can jump ahead a little bit, and because we're going to talk about this later. One way to protect yourself from unknowns is insurance. So when you look at that chapter on insurance, please look at it carefully, because you're quite right, Kevin. You can have some movements that just, in fact, we've had it. We had COVID-19 that actually put a lot of people out of business on this island and even around the world. But we're in the Bahamas, so let's talk about the Bahamas. There's some businesses that have been in business for decades who are no longer in business because they did not have a plan, did not know it was coming, and they just went out of business, and they will not come back. So you can have an incident like that. You can have something as simple as the government going up in duty on some stuff, and you just can't afford it. Going up on property tax, and as you're saying, you have a long-term lease with your clients, and so you can't just spin around and say, government just went up on property tax. I gotta increase. I'm using your rental returns as a part of what I pay property tax with, and government went up on property tax. I gotta collect more rent from you today. You just can't do that. So it is quite a conundrum. So what some people do, as I started off saying, is maybe you start looking at these things are possible. How do I prepare for these possibilities? And we'll talk about that when we get to the risks the risk chapter. Lamar, I'm going to pick on you. Any thoughts there?
Well, I've been trying to put my thoughts together on it, but governance in itself is a complicated
Okay,
thing.
so while you're putting your thoughts together and come back to you,
Mm.
or you can just butt in whenever you get
Yeah,
them.
it's just because I had a personal experience that made all of this terrible for me. So I'm traumatized, but yeah, but please, I'll come back to it.
You mean you had a personal experience with this sort of thing, you saying?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
my
you're gonna
property
share
and
that
board
with us
agrees.
later, or you're gonna share
Yeah,
that with
I'll
us?
share it. I'll share it afterwards. It may take a minute
Okay,
to say it in
all
a
right,
nice
good.
way. Yeah.
Now, when we look at it, sorry, let's go back to Krista. Krista was talking about something tied to what we're talking about, which is you have a tenant in the property, and through no fault of their own, someone hasn't been paying certain costs and certain fees, and a third party swoops in and says, I mentioned the government, but Crystal mentioned the bank, and says, we want our things, because things don't belong to you unless you fully pay for them. So if you owe someone for something, there's a standard thing in accounting. When we talk about the accounting formula is, anyone knows what the accounting formula is? I got a couple of accountants here, so they should be able to tell me. Something equals something else.
But assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity. Assets equals
All right,
liabilities.
so that's the accounting formula. Assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. Another way, simple way to put the accounting formula is, what a business owns is equal to what it owes to others and what it owes to the owners. Let me say that again. What a business owns, which is its assets, is equal to its liabilities, which is what it owes to others, and it's what and its owner's equity, which is what the business owes to the owners. What you owe is equal to what you own. What you own is equal to what you owe. So when you borrow money and you owe money, the person, or when you borrow something, the person that you borrow from owns that thing. Some of us forget that. It doesn't matter that you're driving around in your $200,000 Mercedes Benz. If you owe someone for it, it's their Mercedes Benz. Same thing with any other property. So as long as you're owing for something, it means that somebody else owns it. And so if you're involved in a property where there is some liability involved in the property, whatever that liability is, it means that somebody owns something of the property, and you are in jeopardy of that owner swooping in and says, give me my things. Marjorie.
Well,
No?
actually, this is actually just something that Blair says that her power is off. I just thought I'd say that.
Okay.
She sent that in the group, so just letting you know.
I wonder if she can join by phone.
Oh, that's a good thing. She sent it in the property
Yeah, like
management.
if she has phone power and enough data, she can just join by phone.
Okay, I'll text that.
And if it's a data issue, then she can call someone and listen in as well. You can always do that too.
Okay.
All right, so Kevin just introduced the whole, we just talked about owing, and this comes from Crystal's question, and that is that, hey, when there is some liability on a property manager needs to not lose sight of that, because it doesn't matter what that liability is. For instance, if a contractor came in and did some work for you as a property manager, and that contractor has not been paid, that means someone has a lien on the property, LEIN, or it means that the property has a liability or the property owes someone, the contractor in this case, something, which means that that someone owns something in the property, doesn't it? Because whoever you owe owns you. And one of the things that an astute property manager has to do is to keep on top of liens and liabilities, and also to try and make sure that they don't get to this place where they suddenly become a problem to you. Everybody on board with that? Okay, for instance, I worked at the central bank for many, many years, as most of you might know. And if you read the Central Bank Act, it actually says in the act that it makes it illegal for anyone to have, for the central bank to allow anyone to have a lien on the central bank, L-E-I-N. So what that means, in other words, the central bank should not allow itself to owe anyone. That's what it means. Or it should not borrow anything from anyone, or allow on, or in, and again, sometimes it's not just borrowing money. If you don't pay someone for something that they've done for you, you owe them. So that's a lien as well. So it comes down to some of the stuff we talked about in the earlier lessons, which is the responsibility of the property manager is to pay bills on time. So what's an example of this? You don't pay the electricity bill, or if the electricity bill is not paid, whoever's fault that it's not paid for a couple months, what can happen? Simple answer. Let me wake up someone who hasn't said anything. I don't know, everyone has said something, but Cohen, I'm picking on you. What can happen? You haven't paid the electricity bill on a property, whether it's a commercial property, whether it's the airport, whether it's something as simple as somebody's resident. If the electricity bill hasn't been paid, what does that translate to?
If the electricity bill hasn't been paid on a property, what does that translate?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Given
sounds like
the conversation we
back
just
on
had.
bills. Sorry?
Pardon me? Go ahead, sorry.
Sounds like you're back on bills, and eventually the people will come to turn you off.
Right, because the power belongs to them. And the only way you have it is if you pay them. And if you don't pay them, eventually you start to do what? Owe them. And if you owe them, then they get some rights. And one of those rights is that they can take the electricity from you. And there's nothing you can do because you owe them. If you're paying them on time, they have a slightly difficult position to just randomly come turn your stuff off. As a matter of fact, you have the right to argue that you should have power all the time and you should never be off because you're paying for it. But that's another story. But certainly if you're not paying the electricity bill or the water bill or whatever else, the people who own that suddenly have the right to take it from you. And that can have consequences. Imagine you're in a commercial building that is doing all sorts of business. Say your tenants in that business are in that building are a number of businesses that you're renting out space to, and you're responsible for paying the rent. And sometimes by being responsible for paying the rent is that you're collecting the electricity bill from your tenants. Or say you're in a situation where they're not even, where half the tenants are not paying the electricity bill to you, the component to you or whatever, and you're not paying the bill. What happens? The light goes off in the building and no one can do business. That's a catastrophe. All right, let's continue. moving it along a bit. Now, there are all sorts of clauses that can be in a covenant. And on page 84 and 85 of the book talks about certain clauses. But I want you to be clear that page 84 and 85 in the book is just a small example of what a covenant could be. These things can I think somebody referred to it before. These things can go on and on and on forever, or they can be as short as you like. But one of the things I want you to take away, and I'll say it again, from the covenants that are in the book, is to find covenants, even if you just restrict yourself to the ones that are this little excerpt that's in the book, and find a way to read through it and come up with, this is my 1 or 2 sentences for what this stuff is saying. Okay, let's talk a little bit about in the other half hour that we have, about what Marjorie brought up earlier, which is special considerations. We want to talk a little bit, spend a little time about talking about the obligations of the property manager, but that's a bit in the property manager. We can always be talking about that, so just touch on that. But we want to introduce something that we're going to talk about a little later, because there's a chapter on this, and this is about your relationship with the tenant and how you choose the right tenant. It's a part of it. So the book talks about special considerations, and I don't know, Georgia, if you're able to communicate and you're able to participate at this time, just show me a hand. But I'm going to ask Lachey to kind of give us a briefing on what she thinks these special considerations are when you're talking about establishing a legal arrangement with a tenant.
Hello. So special arrangements, when it comes to establishing a legal arrangement with a tenant, I guess you would first have to analyze them, analyze their lifestyle, if it agrees with what you're looking for, what if it aligns for what you're looking for to as an occupant for the property. I would say not too much deep into their lifestyle, because it still has to ultimately align with the standard and the guidelines that you set for the property. But it would be circumstantial in the event that you say maybe you don't want any kids on the property, and they may have one kid, and then you allow that because of, you know, your interaction with them, something like that.
Okay, well, you brought up an interesting point, Lachey, and that is the point about what we like to call in business the slippery slope, which is you set standards for how you're gonna have a relationship, and then you make one slight exception, and you say, oh, you know, that's okay. You know, your example was you have a rule that your tenants, you don't want any kids on the property, but you have this long-standing, well-paying, wonderful tenant, no problems, and so forth and so on, and somehow they have a kid, and you have this dilemma. Do I tell them, look, you know, there's no kids on the property, so tomorrow you and your little, 2-week-old baby need to go? Or do you say, well, okay, you know what, this is against the rules, but we're gonna let it slide. I think this is something we can talk about. Do you let things slide? I'll give you an example.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, Blair, go ahead.
Yeah, when I think about special considerations, I just think about like reasonable exceptionalities made between made between, well, that the property manager makes. I can recall as a tenant before, one of the rules or regulations that that the owner had is that, you know, you cannot operate a business out of the inside the apartment. But because one, I was always on time with rent. I kept the apartment very neat. You know, he made that exception for me. So I just think like special consideration is like exceptionalities.
Okay, now one of the things I'm gonna throw in the pot here is that exceptions have an inherent danger, because the minute you start to make one, then suddenly hands go up all around from, I want my exception too. And then next thing you know, you have a landslide of exceptions and the whole thing goes to pots. And you can really, really get yourself into an unmanageable situation. I was the the systems and management consultant to the bridge authority when the new bridge was being constructed. I was seconded from the central bank to be the system and management consultant for that project. And one of the things that we decided that happened to fall in line with this whole thing about exceptions is prior to the new bridge, the old bridge had exceptions for people paying when they got over. So if you were prime minister, you didn't have to pay, obviously, to go with the old bridge. If you are, you know, the head of a hotel or you worked at certain hotels, you didn't have to pay. This is how it started. These top people didn't have to pay. And then, you know, the prime minister didn't have to pay, so deputy prime minister, then the ministers didn't have to pay. And all of a sudden the parliamentary secretaries and eventually a whole lot of people weren't paying. Ambulances weren't paying, so no policemen were paying to go. And then no police cars, and then suddenly no policemen, no matter whether in a police car or not. The exceptions just mushroomed. So one of the things we did with the new bridge was says, you know what, there'd be absolutely no exceptions. If the Queen of England was coming over the bridge, that vehicle would have to pay. No matter what, everything has to be paid for. No exceptions, because the minute you make one exception, whatever criteria used to make that exception can be applied right next to it. And then once you apply next to that, then you just get into a mushroom of exceptions. And so we made a decision in the law, and put it in law, that every single vehicle that came over the bridge had to pay, no matter who was in the vehicle. And it was very easy to kind of justify, you know what, it's the vehicle that's coming over. It's the vehicle that's using the bridge. So if you had, you know, if you had the king of the world in the vehicle, it still was putting wear and tear on the bridge, so it needed to pay. Originally there was all sorts of heeing and hawing. How could you ask the prime minister to pay? But you know what? Eventually everybody accepted it. There were no exceptions. And it didn't open you up to saying, because you accepted the prime minister, next thing in a year's time, you're going to find yourself accepting half the country. So every police car that goes over pays, every ambulance pays. It doesn't matter. There's a payment because of the vehicle. Someone had a comment. I can't remember who it was.
Okay, that was me. With those exceptions, I do agree. I do agree that they can cause issues. And it can also cause liability and legal issues as well. With the example of having a child or having no kids allowed in your apartment, and because you've had this tenant for forever and they've been so good with maintaining the place as well as paying their rent on time, they end up pregnant, have a child, and you'd be like, okay, well, you've been here so long, blah 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 blah, and then next 2 years they're pregnant again. So before you know it, you have an apartment building that has possibly 3 kids inside of it. you know, and then other persons coming into the facility, they're like, but you say no children, but I see children living in here. So you kind of overextending yourself with those, you know, you have to find a way to say to, I guess, your value tenant, okay, after the child, at the point the child reaches 1, you're gonna have to find someplace else to stay, because we're only gonna allow the child at the age of a baby to stay there. So you don't just force it on them, okay, you have to leave now. You know, you're still giving them some consideration. And then with the example that Blair gave with the business, you know, a lot of times people do allow their tenants to house a business inside their facility. However, that can also be a liability issue where, for instance, if it's a business that uses some electrical equipment and it causes a fire inside the apartment, you know, and the insurance for the building specifically says you cannot have a business inside your facility, and this is stipulated in insurance coverage. So it could cause problems for the landlord if
Okay, that's what we lost. We're losing your voice, but let's
they're going to
kick
go
off.
and try and claim for it, but to a tenant that has been faithful, you know. So
Odessa, you're coming in and out.
hello?
Yeah, you're
Okay,
going
I'm
in
sorry.
and out.
Okay, I was
But
just saying about,
Go
can
ahead.
you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I was saying about the possible liability issues. If you allow a tenant to have a business and they say, for instance, it causes a fire or something, and in the insurance coverage for the property, it stipulates no commercial activity, and you have to try and prove that, okay, it wasn't a commercial activity, but they're able to indicate that, okay, there was some commercial activity happening, so the owner cannot claim from an insurance, you know, but they were being generous and kind to a faithful tenant. So I was just saying that these exemptions or exceptions can lead to many different problems for owners.
Wonderful point. And points actually. And as property managers, these kinds of conversations should be telling you there's a lot of things to think about. So one of the things that I got out of what has been said by the persons who spoke is that there's some things that you really can't manage. Yeah, you can say, we don't want any children in the building. Well, what if somebody does? I mean, people get pregnant. Are you going to kick them out the day after they have the child? No, you can't. So you probably have to think a little deeper and say, we don't want to have any children, but if this situation happens, this is how we're going to deal with it. However it is that you think is humanely the way to deal with it. You may actually want to have that in writing, how you deal with the exception, because exceptions can happen. And to the point that was just raised about liability, it is a huge point. And we're going to talk about insurance and risk later, but it's been brought up. And I give you an example of how huge this is and how some people don't realize that it's something they have to consider. One of the things I used to be responsible for in the bank was the management of all the bank's assets and for risk management. So we had a wonderful example here of one day one of the messengers leaving the bank at around 7 o'clock in the morning, was going across the light at Market and Duke Streets, and someone ran into the vehicle, mashed it up really badly. In fact, he was a little hurt. The insurance company claimed that they were not going to pay. This is the bank's insurance. Our fleet, we had fleet insurance. And so we're not going to pay. The reason why they said they were not going to pay was because the accident happened at 7 in the morning. As a matter of fact, it was 7:15. And they specifically say, we're not paying because the accident happened at 7:15 in the morning. And our insurance says the car has to be driven by an authorized driver, which he was, and it has to be for the purpose of the banks. It has to be for the banks for work. And they said the banks the bank's hours of operations are 9 to 5. He is driving the car at 7 o'clock when he got into the accident. So we're not paying because your operating hours are 9 to 5. And we literally had to get almost the legal people involved to say to them, no, the bank's hours are 9 to 5, but the messenger is leaving the bank at 6:45 to go and pick up the newspapers from the Tribune and Guardian, which needs to be distributed to the executive managers before 9 o'clock. And some of the executive managers at work at even 7. But this messenger is responsible for distributing newspapers to the 13 executive managers every morning, and they have to get them early. And it took almost half a year before the insurance company was persuaded to pay for the car. Just an example of how you can get into sticky stuff with exceptions and liabilities. Okay. The stuff here talks a bit about special considerations, and I will quickly list them, although you have your book. The ones that the book is talking about is allergies, disabilities and long-term illnesses, emotional support animals, changes in national, international policy and standards. In fact, I can stop there because we just had a situation where internationally, for instance, we had a situation where something happened internationally that forced things to change. So for instance, if you're renting, and this is a question to you, you're renting a property to someone and the lease is up on a particular date, and this is a foreigner and they're supposed to be going back home, but on that date, the world goes into lockdown. Or as has happened realistically in the Bahamas, you're renting properties to people and the country goes into lockdown and no one has a job anymore. How do you deal with that, Marjorie?
Well, actually, no, I was trying to, ask the question again.
Okay, so ask your question.
You had already given the case. I just wanted to confirm. You said that the bank, in fact, did get to pay in the end after 1 year.
Yeah, we eventually won the argument because we proved that although, I mean, we argued and successfully argued that although the bank's business operations are from 9 to 5, and that's what's in the insurance document, it's unreasonable to say that a messenger who comes to work at 6:30 and his job is to pick up the papers and get them distributed to executive management by 7:30 should not be driving the bank's car at 6:45.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Cleophas?
Yes, this is on the question you just asked. I know during the whole COVID period when people lost their jobs, a lot of people were put in, like they had provisions to do deferred payments. I think even banks were offering it for 3 to 6 months, I think, whereas it's an agreement where, okay, we understand that you're going through hard times or you don't have an income right now. And after a period of time, now it did affect a lot of people's interest rates. It did affect people's payments. And in some instances, some people's payments actually rocketed after that. But it was provisions in place for where people who could not afford to pay their rent at that time could not be evicted or placed out on the street because of non-payment. They just had to defer payments and probably make up on the tail end, not just for renters, but even for people who have mortgages and stuff like that, just so people could get a chance to catch back up.
Mm-hmm. So again, we go back to the whole question of risk management, which we talk about later. And this is this is why when you get to the chapters, and even now you should really start thinking about this stuff as a property manager. How do I answer the question? And this is called contingency planning. How do I answer the questions? If this really crazy stuff happens, what do I do? You don't want to wait for things to happen before you have to think about how you address them. The best possible position is to think about what can go wrong, and you think about it up front. I'm going to do A. What can go wrong if I'm doing A? What's the worst thing that can happen? What are all the different things that can happen? If they happen, what do I then do? This is like playing chess. A great chess player knows if this happens, then I'm going to do that. And if I do that, it's probably going to have these consequences and these results. And my reaction to that, those consequences and these results could be this and that. So you have a plan that takes you got to be great planners. So for instance, if you have something like what happened in 9/11, if those of us who were around in 9/11 would remember that in 9/11, what happened was that you had there's a declaration that no planes, no vessel was to leave any port at all. So there were no planes flying, no boats moving, nothing, nowhere in the world. It just, everything stopped. All airports and all seaports were closed, and it wasn't for a day. This closure happened for weeks. So if you had an expensive arrangement with, one of these arrangements where you had an Airbnb or a residential thing that you're renting to someone at $30,000 a night, and they were due to leave on September 11th, 2000, whenever that happened, I think it was, I can't remember anymore. And on the day that they're supposed to leave, the world gets closed down for 2 weeks. What do? Are you gonna say, Bob, tough, you gotta be here for 2 weeks, you're gonna keep paying me that $20,000 a night? Any ideas?
Isn't there a contingency for
I want
that?
to put something else to that first as well, if you don't mind. Let me just add something to that. So let me add this to that exact same question, because I was actually going to build up a question just like that, Ian. But
okay,
for everybody here who's to be a property manager, you are not the owner. So consider this as well. What if the owner does not have the same moral compass that you do, in the sense that, we'll allow this person to stay, as it was maybe a month or so before government started making it against the law to evict people. So suppose the owner imposes on you to either collect their funds or kick these people out.
That's very true. That's a very good point. And it could really put things into perspective, because even me as a chief concierge, I've even been placed in that situation where, we have cancellation policies, but we had a lot of clients who either caught COVID, had to go on some spontaneous surgery. So in that case, like, do we still go for, do they still forfeit their deposit, or do we apply a future credit? So I do agree. And sometimes, sometimes you can have, morals and principles will say, yeah, let's just refund their deposit, but then the owner or the co-owners, they may say no. The cancellation policy, it is what it is. We have to stick by the cancellation policy. So I think he raised a really good point.
Yeah, so what we're getting from this discussion, that as property managers, you really can't flippantly not consider these things. These things need to be considered, and considered up front. What you don't want to get caught with your pants down and have these sort of things happen, and then that's when you're scrambling about trying to make a decision about what you will do. You want to kind of do a deep dive into, this could happen, and what am I going to do? And in some cases, you probably still would end up with, I'm going to take the situation, take it situation by situation. I'm going to look at all the factors and the contexts and then make a decision. But fine, you need to know that that's what you're going to do. And of course, in other cases, you're going to establish a general policy, and policy means guideline. Sometimes we go wrong by overextending ourselves on the policy level, because at the end of the day, if you are in leadership, you use policy to guide your decision, but in many cases, or in some cases, you can actually make a decision and say the policy is X, but because of the context, I am going to do Y. But of course, you have to be very, very clear and very, very right about why you're going to go against policy and document it and be transparent. Yeah, but the bottom line is, coming out of this discussion, the property manager has to have their hats on about the possibility of things happening. We'll talk a bit more about this when we start talking about risk. The rest of the stuff talks about things like, you're dealing with a particular client who it's not their property, it's someone you are dealing with as a client, but the owner has fired the cook, who has always been the cook for the property, because the owner has run into a matter with the cook and doesn't want the cook. And then a regular client comes in and says, if that cook is not here, I'm going somewhere else. I'm going where that cook is. So now you have a decision to make about how you work that sort of. These are the kinds of things that you'd have to work out. Do you want to have, are there areas that are off limits to people who are your clients, or to people who are servicing your clients? You want to be able to think about those and spell those out. Sometimes we don't bother thinking about that and only begin to think about it when people are in place, and suddenly you don't want people to be here or to touch this or touch that. You want to think about those things. Occupancy limits. And this is a big problem in the Bahamas. You rent a place to one person or couple, and in your mind, that's who you rent it to. And then next thing you hear from other tenants is, there are like 15 people living in that little studio. So as a property manager, have you considered what you would do and how you would prevent that? Cleophas.
We do have situations where people who request that, okay, it's just me and my husband. Like you say, when you come, you see 6 people living in the house. Also, there is an issue in the country as well, as people rent from you and then rent your place out to other people. So sometimes the people that you have the agreement with, who's supposedly supposed to be the tenant, when you go there, you see a whole different family living there, and you be like, okay, yes. Who are you? And they say, hey, I'm renting from Mr. Thompson. You be like, no, Mr. Thompson is renting from me.
I agree. It's like they sub-rent.
Subletting.
Or subletting.
Yeah. Sublet.
and that these things are serious problems in the country, and they are problems because your rental agreement should stipulate that this cannot happen. And if it doesn't, and I'm saying rental agreements, and rental covers a whole lot of things, but we'll call it a rental agreement. If you don't stipulate really clearly these sort of boundaries and you leave the door open to it, some people will walk through the door. Sometimes you literally even have to tell people, look, someone who rent and people do this. This is another problem some people have. People rent an Airbnb, and they say they're renting it for 2 days, but they're really renting it to house a party for 1,000 guests, and some rambunctious party. And in some cases, people are renting the Airbnb as a business thing. They rent the Airbnb and they're having a party, and they're charging everyone who's coming to a party $100 or something. Is this what you want to do when you rent your Airbnb? If that's fine with you, it is. But if it isn't, then you need to be able to stipulate in your thing, yeah, you can rent my Airbnb, but you can't use it for any more than 5 guests or 10 guests, something like that. Cleophas, you still had something to add, or your hands were up from the last time? Okay, that's okay, so yeah, and so we're talking about special care provisions and unregistered vehicles, and this is, I want to stop on that for 2 seconds because that's another sore point in the Bahamas. This thing
Yes,
about people believing that it's fine to just drop their stuff on your property. You know, people setting up garages and all sorts of things on the property. So if that is an issue for you as a property manager, you do want to stipulate that, hey, you know, you can rent the apartment, but you can't be a car collector. You can't have 10 cars. I mean, if you're rich enough to have 10 cars, you're gonna have to store 8 of them somewhere else, and on and on and on. You can make those types of stipulations because these things happen. Let's skip over to the whole thing about tenants. We probably won't have enough time to go through this, but I'm gonna just skip through. I mentioned I'm gonna set you a quiz on chapter 5 in particular. So it talks about in that section about doing background checks, checking. This is about the tenant's qualification, qualities, and prerequisites. A lot of property managers are so desperate that they really don't spend enough time on this particular aspect of it, the know your customer thing. And you have to develop your own strategy about how you achieve comfort with someone before you establish a relationship with them. And I would make this one big sort of rule: never act out of desperation, never. So it don't matter how much you need to get the place rented and whatever your thing that might be pinching you. Always ask yourself, am I doing this because I'm desperate? Am I doing this because I'm a thinking being? And it shouldn't be because you're desperate. Never act out of desperate. If desperation is pushing you towards a decision, run away from the decision. That's just my kind of word there. So some of the strategies that you want to use for kind of deciding on your relationships, because you guys have the book, I'm gonna pick on you to give me some of these, even if you're reading it out of the book. So let's go. So Cohen, what are some of the things you want to have in place to help you figure out whether you want to have a relationship with the client, a tenant? Cohen, if you're speaking, your mic is off. Okay, let me go to Odessa then.
Sorry, repeat the question for me, please.
Yeah, the book in chapter 5 talks about some of the things that you would want to do. It calls it due diligence. You're about to establish a relationship with a client or a tenant or whatever you want to call the person. You don't want to go cold turkey. I mean, I know some people do it and do fly by the seat of their pants. And one of the things I mentioned, you certainly don't want to establish a relationship with anyone because you're desperate. So there's some things you want to consider putting in place before you establish a relationship to help you establish your kind of comfort. And what are some of those things?
For me, I think some of the deciding factors would be checking on their employment, confirming how long they've been on a job, and confirming how long they would have been on a job. Secondly, I would like to find out where they would have lived before and possibly get a reference from their previous landlords. and possibly even I may even require police records.
Yes.
Because knowing the persons who they've also shared, like then who were their neighbors at the time, and did they cause nuisance? Because oftentimes you have these people, they come, they're smiling, and they appear to be the nicest people, but when they move into your units, they complain about everything, they break up everything, and then they're a nuisance to the tenants, to the other tenants around them, loud noise, loud talking all hours of the night, maybe parties, etc. So it's a
Okay.
whole lot of background checking and confirming the information that they provided.
Mhm.
I agree with her. Just to piggyback off of what she said, I think some form of vetting should be done. I also would like to highlight one of the things that the text said, which are interviews. I think that's a really good way to
Yeah, very good
see
point.
if the tenant
good
is suitable. I think
Very good.
interviews are excellent form.
Yeah, one of the things that interviews do, in particular for those who on the call who've never conducted one as a part of establishing a relationship, is that, and you should really try to hone your interviewing skills. It is a wonderful skill to have, to be able to interview someone up front and as a first meeting. Because it gives you the opportunity to see the person's small cues, the way they carry the body. Some people they can talk really well, and so the best interview, to be honest with you, is an in-person interview, because you get some people on the phone and they will smooth you over. But if you're astute enough and you're looking someone in the face, you can pick up on some things. That interview is an important part of it. Some people rely solely on an application. And of course, you know, I'm not going to put anything on my application that's going to mess with my chances of getting what I want. But it becomes difficult if you're being interviewed by someone who is skilled to really pull it off. But I mean, some people can, but it makes it a little more difficult. Okay, so the rest of this talks about, it says background checks, checking with neighbors, using your instincts and observation, which I kind of talked about a little bit. There's some of us who don't give enough credit to our gut feelings. And if you are in a situation or you meet a client and whatever, and you get some disturbing gut feeling, I really admonish you to not dismiss it. Especially in cases, there are many cases where we get these disturbing gut feelings, but everything else is telling us that we're being silly. Don't disregard your little disturbing gut feelings, because you know we are all blessed with the ability to listen to what people like to call sometimes the still small voice, and you should be able to not disregard your gut feelings. Researching references from employers and previous employers and previous landlords. And I would also say sometimes if you can, even not just talk to employers, but even previous coworkers. Because I find in doing some of this thing in the past, that sometimes an employer has an opinion of an employee that when you speak to their coworkers, it's a different employee. So, and it works both ways. You can speak with an employer who says, you know, that person is terrible. Don't even go there. And then you speak to their colleagues, 3 and 4 people who actually work directly with them, and their colleagues represent them as an angel divine. And then sometimes it's the opposite. You get an employer saying to you, well, hey, you know, this is a wonderful person. Sometimes they're saying that because they just evaluated them wrong, or they don't want to be honest with you. And in the case of some employer who's trying to get rid of someone, if this is an employment thing, Some employers actually give you a good report on an employee because they want to get rid of them. And if they tell you something negative, you won't take them up. But you want to ask other people, that's my point, who work with a person to get a wider assessment. And of course, there's the thing about the application. Now, when we talk about the application, perhaps one of the exercises we may get a time to do is you devising an application and what you think is appropriate for a client of yours. And when you're devising an application, you're thinking about, what do I really want to see in writing? What do I want to know? And you want that to be in the application. And things that you don't care to know, you may not even want to bother with, but you certainly want to prioritize. These are the things that I must know. And then, of course, you have to know that there's some things that you shouldn't ask people because you're invading on their individuality and privacy. So it's an interesting thing for you to create an application. And some of us may not have an application for our business, and you need to have one that's uniquely yours. The last part of this chapter 5 talks about the rights of the tenants, and I won't go through those. I'm going to leave it to you to go through that and really understand this stuff, because this is something you're going to be tested on. Tenants do have rights. And what does the word right? Cleophas has his answer. What is Cleophas? Let me let you go. Cleophas, your mic's not on.
It wasn't really an answer for that, but I was saying, because I saw it with tenants' rights, and then we was talking earlier about choosing the right tenant. I noticed in the country too, it's a very thin line we have between rental preference and rental discrimination. So I know a lot of people say that there's a lot of rental discrimination because I guess they feel like if they don't have a certain, I guess, government job or secure job or high paying job, it's like they can't get to rent in good areas or so, or people look at them different when it comes to renting. But I know on the other side of the fence, when I deal with clients, a lot of them, this is what they prefer. Like it's a very thin line, because that's what the owner prefer. They want someone who has a secure paycheck or high earnings, because they believe that, hey, it's lower risk with them. So I mean, I guess we could address that in the next class, but I know that's a
and
issue
that is an interesting point, and we did touch on this a little earlier in one of our early conversations, where one of the things I pointed out that as property managers, you be careful about using someone's job or someone's income as some be and end all of determining anything about the person. There are some people who are making tons of money, making figures, who cannot pay their bills, and do not pay their bills. They are so overextended. Yes, their salary says they're making $150,000 a year, but they're spending $250,000 a year, so they can't pay their rent. There's some people who are making from nothing to a very small amount of money, who may be the product of somebody taking care of their stuff for them. They may not have a job, but they might have had someone who left them a fortune that's paying them X dollars a month, or someone who is committed to paying their rent no matter what it is. And in some cases, they might not even be in a position to reveal that to you. So you may need to put together an application that not only says, what is your income and where do you work? Basically asking the person, how will you source the rent payment? Because sometimes somebody's salary is not the only source of how they will source their rent payment. Certainly you don't want anyone sourcing the rent payment from illegal activities, but there are a lot of legal ways that people can pay a rent without having a job. And you don't want to get rid of people by saying, if you don't have a job, you can't rent from me. At least that's my opinion. Okay, so have a good read through chapter 5. You're going to get a very comprehensive quiz that comes from that chapter and comes from the discussion we've had today. We didn't go through the rights of a tenant, but you guys should really know that. And for next week, we've already touched on and done some stuff on the property management agreement, but we're going to touch on that again. So for next week, I'd really want you to prepare chapters 6 and 7 for next week, and even go ahead and touch on chapter 8, but particularly we're going to focus on chapter 6 and 7. I'm going to send you your exercise for your assignment, and also prepare a quiz for you to just play with on your own on chapter 5. Happy Independence to everyone, and I'm really touched that everyone, despite the holiday, happened to still found the wherewithal to be here, and some great sharing this Saturday morning with you. Before we leave, any other questions, comments, queries? And by the way, I'm available in case you didn't get that. You can call me anytime, or send me a WhatsApp, or send me an email about anything. If you're doing an assignment and you run into issues, I'm not here. As I said before, and I'll say a million times, I want everyone to succeed here. So any kind of help you need, just let me know. Odessa and Marjorie, in that order.
I had a question. Is the rent to own topic going to come back up later on in the class? Because that is a topic that I've been, the concept, I've been aware of it for some time. However, I've never had any in-depth conversation on it from someone that potentially has greater insight on it. Is that
Okay,
going to come
wonderful.
up at another time?
Let me put it this way. Anything any of you want to focus on as we are here, just put it in the class thing and says, look, this is a topic for discussion. In fact, I probably should make this a staple and quote it. Before every class, I am actually expecting my colleagues here to say, I read through chapter 5, I read through chapter 6, or it doesn't matter what I read through. Could we have a discussion on topic X? Or this is a question that came up for me, or I was doing the assignment and this is something that I came up in my mind. Let's have a discussion on it. That's why we're here, to talk about things that are important to the people who are here. So let's make sure we post those things. Okay, Marjorie, you're next. And
Oh, no, you pretty much answered my question. And I will definitely be reaching out to you very shortly. So,
yeah,
but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, part of the utility here is that if you do have anything that you need to discuss, or anything that you want to talk about, and even if you want to talk on a one-on-one, we can do that. If anything, I just make it something where everybody else is aware of something interesting that came up as anyway. So if you're having challenges with any of the exercises you're doing, find something you don't understand, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here. Okay, so if there are no other questions or comments, I'd like to wish you all the best for the weekend. I'm traveling this week, but I do expect to be back in town before next weekend. So I'm gonna be able to still communicate, I believe, and I will send you. Please watch out in the Google Classroom for your assignments and quizzes and stuff like that. And also I need to set up a couple groups for group assignments, all that, hope to get done this week, hopefully. So take care and all the best.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Enjoy, everybody.
Enjoy.
Bye, everyone.
Mm.